Big plays in the second half prevented the upset.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my 6th year covering U of L, 4th year hosting this show. And I want to take the time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. We are reacting to the Louisville 28-14 victory over James Madison on Friday night. It wasn't pretty, but a win is a win. A couple of big second half plays prevented the Dukes from pulling off the upset. I thought the defense stepped up in major ways, especially on the defensive line. It was a rough day at the office for the offense. I thought JMU was incredibly well prepared in this game. Overall, vibes weren't the greatest, but the win is the most important thing at the end of the day. So we're going to give a full recap on the show today. But first, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, so there's a lot to unpack with this game. And, I don't think that the final score really tells the tale of how close this game actually was. 28-14, the final score. Depending on when you got in on the spread, Louisville covered. If you took the Cardinals at 13.5, minus 13.5, which it kind of went back and forth. It opened up at 16.5, and then it fluctuated from 13.5 to 15.5 and just kind of kept going back and forth. But if you took the Cardinals at 13.5, well, you covered the spread. And the main takeaway from the show that we're going to keep repeating is that while it wasn't pretty, the main thing is that a win is a win. And you avoided disaster. Losing this game would have been, I would argue, borderline catastrophic for this team for the 2025 campaign. And we'll discuss more about that, coming up through the bye week. Cardinals having that early week 3 bye, which honestly might help them after what we saw on Friday night. But Louisville found themselves trailing 7-6 going into halftime. James Madison would receive the second half kickoff. And I was a little bit nervous, but I ultimately thought that, hey, Jeff Brom is going to give a good halftime speech. They're going to tweak some things, and Louisville's going to make the necessary adjustments. Well, James Madison comes out of the half and goes on a 9-play, 75-yard touchdown drive and kind of takes all of the wind out of the sails, right? There was, on a 3rd and 8, Alonzo Barnett connected with Nick, I think it's DiGiorano. Forgive me for saying that name wrong. 19 yards and got inside of the red zone. And there was a pass interference on another 3rd down earlier on the drive where Tay Holloway looked like he held Dupree when the ball was a little bit underthrown. And that touchdown drive, gosh, it kind of made things really interesting. And I remember telling a friend of mine that I was watching the game with, I said, the Louisville needs to get some points on the board this drive, or, you could be in the danger zone. And this is when the first of 3 big plays happened during the second half. And it wasn't the only 3 big plays, but these are the 3 most notable. The first one was on a first down. It was a 1st and 10 at the Louisville 36. Miller Moss hit Chris Bell on, looked like a slant route toward the middle to where Chris, fought off the press on man coverage, ended up breaking toward the middle, caught the football, and he was off to the races. He had about, 50 yards after the completion and ended up tying the game. Louisville got the 2-point conversion there on it was like a one-handed catch in the end zone to tie it up at 14. And that's the first big play. That was the first momentum seizing play. But Louisville really wasn't able to capitalize on that because James Madison went 3 and out the next drive. And then Louisville answered with a 3 and out. Then James Madison had a 7-play, 19-yard drive, and then Louisville went 3 and out again. After that, it was, excuse me, the next big play was in the fourth quarter, backed up at their own end zone, 3rd and 10 at their own 8-yard line. Alonzo Barnett, the third, drops back and gets sacked by Clev Lubin in the end zone, fumbles the ball, and Adonijah Green ends up recovering it to give Louisville a 20-14 lead and miss the extra point, of course. But that's the second momentum swinging play because the offense really wasn't doing much, so the defense took matters into their own hands. And then I would argue probably I'd say that this is definitely the third most important play, with the rushing attack being bottled up until this point. So nice to see Isaac Brown break off a 78-yard touchdown run with 3:31 left in the game to basically ice it. You ended up going up by 14 points at that point. James Madison wasn't able to do much, having to throw the football. They got close to scoring, but Louisville bent but didn't break. So those 3 big plays, Chris Bell's touchdown reception, Clev Lubin's forcing the sack, and A.J. Green recovering the fumble in the end zone, and then Isaac Brown with that big touchdown run. Like, those 3 plays pretty much summarized the entire night, because outside of that, outside of the defensive line playing well, it was not really a good performance from the home team. It felt like James Madison was incredibly well prepared for this game. Right away, they were playing really well. And I thought, we mentioned at the end of last week, before the game, you talk about the keys to success, and I mentioned that Louisville needed to control the line of scrimmage. They needed to start strong and limit their mistakes and not beat themselves. And it felt like they were 0 for 3. They were 0 for 3 in that because they didn't start strong. They were trailing, going into halftime. All of the penalties, like there was a penalty on 4th down where Louisville forced the fumble, but it was a holding call and completely wiped off a really good stop by the defense. The Cardinals lost the field position battle for most of this game. Like James Madison's first 2 possessions, I mean, they were either in Louisville territory or right outside of Louisville territory. So just felt like this was an all systems misfire for the majority of the first half. Outside of like the overall defensive performance, I thought the defensive line was the highlight of this game. Like if you highlight any position group that definitely rose to the occasion, they showed up and showed out, it was the Cardinals' defensive line. But the vibe check for this, I think that the bye week comes at a perfect time because there are some things that this team needs to work out on offense, on defense, you name it. I mean, it's across the board. But, after the game, I was just relieved. I know that the win got taken out of the sails, like the excitement around the season. It kind of has made everyone ask, well, should we temper expectations now because of how poorly they played? And after watching teams all across the country struggle with teams that they're supposed to beat by double digits, I'm not ready to throw in the towel just yet, especially since this team is 2-0. Clemson struggled with Troy. SMU lost to Baylor. And the rest of the ACC has been kind of struggling outside of, honestly, Miami and Florida State. Those have been the 2 best teams through the first 2 weeks. It's hard to tell at the moment. I think that you have to hope that things can change in the bye week. It's early on in the season. You're not supposed to have everything figured out. But there are some alarms going off, respectively. I'm not saying that it's time to go into a full-on panic. But, there are some things that we've seen after the first 2 weeks. You're like, guys, this has got to get better. This has got to get better. So I'm going to enjoy the fact that Louisville is 2-0. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't ideal. It didn't inspire a ton of confidence, especially on the offensive side of the football. But the Cardinals are 2-0. And one of the main reasons why is because the defensive line was absolutely dominant, and we're going to discuss that performance and the overall defensive performance when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. First, I want to take the time to tell you about our friends over at Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their new industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. If you need parts fast for a project, like I did about a month ago, and realized at one part in the process, I was like, oh gosh, when am I going to get these parts? And Supply House saved the day. They had next day delivery, and that was a game changer for me. Join the free Trademaster program today and score some serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Before we get into the next segment, let's talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, Gametime. Guys, football season, of course, it's here. It's the best time of the season for me, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, rivalries, energy in the stands, etc. But let's be real, getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself, with the endless queues, hidden fees, and prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best price with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Gametime, and in just a couple taps, I saw amazing deals to the game against James Madison last Friday. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go, but I mean, moving forward, Gametime is going to be the service that I use as the games get closer and closer. You can get college football tickets as little as $25. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Carnation, thank you all so much for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Continuing along in this Monday recap edition of Locked On Louisville. Louisville victorious over James Madison 28-14. And as I mentioned, the score wasn't necessarily an indication of how close this game was, because it was very, very, very close. It was too close for comfort, and I was nervous going down the stretch, but the Cardinals made plays, especially the defense. And the defensive line, I felt like, was good throughout the night. Now, there were a couple plays where they didn't perform well, but they gave up 263 total yards of offense, 137 of those passing, 126 on the ground. James Madison rushed the ball 47 times for 126 yards. That's 2.7 yards per rush. Now, understand that sack yardage is compiled into that number, so it's going to skew it a little bit because Louisville was in the backfield all night long, and they recorded 6 sacks against James Madison. The star of the game, if you had to pick one, it's Clev Lubin. Clev Lubin was incredible in the game on Friday night. 10 total tackles. That was second only behind TJ Quinn. He had 1.5 tackles for loss. He had 1.5 sacks and 1 forced fumble in the end zone that completely changed this game and gave the Cardinals their first lead of the night in that third quarter. Clev Lubin has been as good, if not better, than advertised. Of course, level of competition taken into consideration, but he has looked the part completely. But it wasn't just him. TJ Quinn had a sack, had a tackle for loss. He had 11 total tackles, leading the way in that category. Wesley Bailey, 8 tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss. Renee Conga, 7 tackles, 0.5 sacks, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a pass deflection. Adonijah Green, 4 tackles and a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Like, the front four for this Cardinals defense was incredible. Clev Lubin, Rene Conga, Wesley Bailey, Adonijah Green. Those 4 players played really, really well. Jordan Girard had 2 tackles, but again, really good in the middle of that defensive line. And not to mention Jerry Lawson, Denzel Lowry. Lawson had half of a sack, half of a tackle for loss. Like, this front of the defensive line, this front of the defense dominated in the trenches for the majority of this game. And that's why you see James Madison only scoring 14 points, despite having some really optimal field position through this game. Like, the Cardinals defense, this was a matter of bending but not breaking. There were times where they gave up plays. There were times where they had some mistakes that were completely preventable. But all in all, when you look at this game from a bird's eye view, 50-something hours later, maybe, you come away impressed by Ron English's defense. I thought that they performed well. James Madison wanted to run the football. We knew that. And Matthew Saluka had 21 carries for 83 yards. Jordan Fuller, 7 for 31. George Pettaway, 5 for 21. Wayne Knight, 5 for 12. Like, it was Matthew Saluka who ran the ball 21 times, averaged 4 yards a carry. Alonzo Barnett, 7 for -23. Of course, that's where the sack yardage comes into play. But there was not a run longer than 13 yards. So you forced James Madison to convert on a series down the field. He's like, okay, you got the first down, do it again, do it again, do it again. Like, the Cardinals didn't give up many big plays on the ground. Now, throwing the football, it was what you would expect from JMU. 15 to 25, 102 yards, 1 touchdown for Alonzo Barnett, a couple missed throws. Matthew Saluka, 3 of 5, and an interception, 35 yards. Isaiah Alston, 0 for 1. If he would have had a good throw early on in the game, James Madison would have been leading within that first series. Like, it was a lateral back to a wide receiver who had a wide open guy down the field, and he just missed the throw. And I think that that's kind of where the improvement needs to come from, is that Louisville has played two offenses that really haven't been able to throw the football. So what is this defense going to look like when, you have Eli Holstein here later this month, who's going to be able to throw the football, and you're playing against a better offensive line, you're playing against better skill position guys. So that's something that has to improve, is the Cardinals' ability to defend, because there were opportunities for big plays, and James Madison just completely missed the throws. So Stanquan Clark got hurt in this game in the second half. Don't have the official injury news at the moment, but it doesn't look good. Lower leg injury for the Cardinals' best defensive player, and just not good at all. I know that there's rumors about it being a potential broken ankle. I'm not going to confirm anything that I haven't been able to at the moment, but it doesn't look good for his availability for the rest of the season. And whenever we get that diagnosis, whenever we get the recovery timeline announced, we're going to react to it and probably talk about why guys like TJ Capers, Caleb Perry, and other guys need to step up in significant ways. Thought that the turnovers and penalties, again, hurt this defense. Now, James Madison had the one interception. Or actually, James Madison had 2 turnovers. Sorry, they had the fumble, and then they had the interception. I think that there were still some opportunities where the Cardinals could have taken the football away and ultimately didn't. It is what it is. The turnovers weren't the largest worry for me. Truthfully, it was the penalties. Now, Louisville's penalties were drastically improved from last week. 5 for 49. But you look at when those penalties came. One was early in the first half where James Madison went for it. 4th down, just inside of Louisville territory. They forced the fumble. They were going to have really good field position, and it was a holding call on the defense. He wasn't even going to throw to the receiver anyway, because there's no way he was going to throw across his body like that. But unnecessary holding call gave James Madison more opportunities. in that second half on the touchdown drive, the lone touchdown drive of the second half that put JMU up 14-6. Tayon Holloway. Now, yes, the ball was a little bit underthrown, so it's maybe not the easiest thing to be able to come back and not have a grab on the jersey, but if you just play that upright, there's a good chance that you're winning that rep, I felt like, if you're Tayon Holloway. And it was just, again, bailing out a JMU team that when you get them in third and long, it's hard for them to convert because they can't really throw the football all that well. So, I mean, again, I'm just finding small pieces to critique, but you have to get better going into the bye week and heading into the rest of the season. But the defense played really well. Defense gave up 14 points. And, hey, can't really complain about the Cardinals holding their opponent to less than 20 points, especially one that was in the AP top 40 heading into the week. So my main concerns outside of Friday's game now is the offense. It was a rough day at the offense for Miller Moss and company. And we'll break it down when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Quick question for all of you college football fans out there. If you could go back in time and sit front row at your school's biggest rivalry game, what hat would you be wearing? Yes, I said hat. For me, it would be the game. These aren't just hats. They're the same vintage styles fans wore back in the 80s and 90s, which I love those styles. And guess what? They still go for the same price they did back then. When you use the code LOCKEDON, you'll get your vintage hat for $16.99. That is an insane deal. If you head to thegamecaps.com, you can grab your team's classic bar or retro circle design and use the code LOCKEDON for an exclusive discount because legends wear the game. Into the final segment of this Monday recap edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. It was not a good day at the office for the offense. Almost in all systems misfire. I mean, from the very beginning, the Cardinals, outside of that defensive touchdown, they scored 22 points. They were 5 of 14 on third down. They only had James Madison had 19. They were 1 of 2 on fourth down. 264 yards of total offense. And it looks even more grim when you realize that 64 of those 151 passing yards came on that Chris Bell touchdown pass. And then the rushing attack, Isaac Brown had that 78-yard touchdown run. Team ended up with 113. Now, Miller Moss sack yardage did come into play there. But, I mean, Isaac Brown, 12 for 104 and a touchdown. I mean, the overall stat line looks good there. But, man, the rushing attack as a whole got bottled up in this game. And I think that can be a testament to how well prepared James Madison was in this game. Miller Moss said in the post-game press conference that it seemed like James Madison was trying stuff that wasn't on film. And that's kind of where I went back to the point of Bob Chesney pulled out all the stops in this game, all the wrinkles. Like, you have to tip your hat to the coaching staff for the Dukes because, I mean, this was a really solid game plan. But no one played good in this. And I'm going to start out with the offensive line. Now, the offensive line, I mean, they didn't get much push at all. There weren't many holes for the running backs to go through. Duke Watson, 7 of 13. Kewan Brown, 4 for 1. It was a rough day at the office for the Cardinals offensive line. And kind of outside of that, kind of outside of the big runs that Isaac Brown has had through the season so far, hasn't been a physically imposing front group for the Cardinals. So that's something that has to get better going into the off week and into the rest of the regular season because the Cardinals are trying to run the football at a successful rate. And you can't do that if your offensive line is not giving you much push at all. The same thing goes with protecting Miller Moss. Like, how many times did you just see a free blitzer come right through the line of scrimmage? Now, look, I understand James Madison threw everything but the kitchen sink at the Cardinals offense. They ran a ton of zero blitz, which for those that don't know, what that means in terms of like a football terminology, zero blitz is one that it's kind of an all or nothing defense, right? It's one where you don't have really many deep defenders. It's man-to-man coverage. And everyone that could rush the passer is pretty much rushing the passer. Like they had moments where it felt like they were rushing 7, rush 8. I mean, hell, there were times where it felt like they were rushing 11 because guys were getting into the backfield so quickly. And I mean, Miller Moss takes a snap and boom, immediately someone's right there. Boom, immediately he has to scramble. And he just looked uncomfortable all night long. Now, some of this, I think, I think that he's not without blame, right? I think a couple throws were missed. I think that he held on to the football at times. But again, how are you supposed to feel when every time you take a snap, you're having to drop back and evade pressure almost immediately? How are you supposed to be super successful when you're getting nothing from the rushing attack and you're being one-dimensional? Yes, with this all-or-nothing defense, theoretically, with Louisville's pass catchers, you should have some big plays, and you did with Chris Bell, but again, wasn't enough to be able to put this game away in a comfortable fashion. So Miller Moss, I didn't think he played great at all. Like, this was not his best day. I also think that a lot of this was not his fault because any quarterback that's going to have to deal with that is probably not going to be all that successful. Now, I do wish that in seeing all this, Louisville would find a way to counteract that with either more screens, throwing out short yardage to Isaac Brown or Duke Watson, getting the tight ends more involved in the short yardage game. I understand Nate Koriski was out for this game, so the Cardinals missed a great inline blocker at that tight end spot. But, this was a tough game. Louisville couldn't get much going offensively, couldn't get into a rhythm. Like, James Madison dominated this game in that fashion. Like, their defense was fantastic against Louisville. I thought the play calling was a little bit predictable. I'll just be honest. I thought that the play calling was a little bit predictable. It seemed like James Madison was throwing all of the stops out. They were, disguising blitzes, running different stunts, and it just seemed like maybe because the offensive line wasn't blocking enough, maybe the play calling didn't get put on full display. But there was a drive in the second half when Louisville got the ball back. They were up 6 in the fourth quarter with a chance under 10 minutes to take some time off the clock, and they threw the ball 3 times and took like 30 seconds off the clock before they punted. So it was like 3 incomplete passes, and that's kind of what I'm looking at. And the fourth down call early in the game where, you only need like the spot of a football, and you could put Miller Moss under center and try to run it up the middle and get that extra yard, but they ended up handing the ball off in the backfield, and it didn't work. Now, I know that it's one of those situations where when you talk about game planning and play calling, that if it works, coaches get praise, and if it doesn't, coaches get scrutiny. It happens to everyone. But I felt like there wasn't one aspect of this team that played well on Friday night, on offense specifically. Even the wide receivers, when Miller Moss did throw passes on the money, dropped catches. Chris Bell had a couple drops. Other guys had a couple drops. Like, this is something that every position group needs. I think that this is a game where soul searching needs to happen. Like, this is an offense that needs to look in the mirror and say, hey, look, we are more talented than what we showed on Friday night. Now, granted, you're not going to play great on offense every single night. Every single game, it's not going to be an electric offensive performance. But this was still a James Madison team that you were supposed to beat by double digits. So, although it's early, although you have a ton of new guys, and I think that that's part of it too. Like, Miller Moss is still building more chemistry with these guys. And when teams are selling out to defend the run and you force the Louisville offense to throw the ball, at least on Friday night, they showed you that they're going to struggle. Now, I don't think that this is the norm for the Cardinals offense. I don't at all. Like, I have been extremely high on this offense because of the personnel, because of Jeff Brom. I fully believe that by the time the Cardinals play Pittsburgh, that's in 3 weeks from this past Saturday. They've got the bye week, they've got Bowling Green, and then they've got Pittsburgh. 3 weeks from now, I think we're going to see a much improved variation of this Cardinals offense, or at least I'm hoping that's the case. I think you're going to see more chemistry. I think you're going to see more ways to kind of combat teams throwing the kitchen sink at the Cardinals offensive line. And it's not all on the offensive line. When you have 7 guys rushing the passer and only 5 guys blocking, I mean, it's simple mathematics. There's going to be 2 guys or at least 1 guy that's going to run through the offensive line untouched, and that's a recipe for disaster. So a lot of things that we're going to be watching for, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on the way you look at it, you're going to probably beat Bowling Green by a good amount. I don't think you're going to lose to the bye week. At least I hope you don't lose to the bye week. So you're probably not going to see how much of an improvement this team's going to make until you hit that September 27th game at Pittsburgh. So I'm not throwing the towel in on the season. I'm not throwing the towel in and writing off this offense. There's way too much talent on this Cardinals offense. And you got the play caller to be able to make it happen. I think that everyone has room for improvement. I think that every position group has room for improvement on both sides of the football. If there wouldn't be, then I think that kind of would be unrealistic because it's week 2. And James Madison, I think, humbled Louisville. I think that that's the best term to use. Is like, despite Louisville winning this game by 14, I think that it was a healthy serving of humble pie. I thought that there was some embarrassment, maybe not felt by the program, but it was like you're sitting there watching and thinking, he's like, this is a team that wants to make the playoffs. At least they're not showing it this game. And like I said, you're seeing teams across the country, playoff hopeful teams. Clemson struggle with Troy. They were down by double digits at the half. Like, there are teams out there that are struggling. It's one of those, you get the wins and you find out ways to get better. So yes, the tone of this episode is overall one that's, I won't say negative, it's critical. But that's how this show's going to be. We're not going to be unfair in criticism, but we're going to point out things that didn't go right. We're also going to highlight that we're hoping moving forward that this was the proverbial trap game, so to speak, and the Cardinals passed the test, something that they didn't do the past 2 seasons. But we'll see. That is going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to talk about Clev Lubin's impact. We're going to talk about Stanquan Clark's injury and much more as we continue through the bye week. Everyone have a great week. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Go Cards.